Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Lincoln Riley, USC. It's been, I think, what a lot of people would say is a slow start to the transfer portal window for this USC program. I want to dive into two different conversations. One, talk about some targets that are going to be on campus, talk about some targets that have hopped into the transfer portal that I think USC should go after. But I also want to dive into what might be the strategy for Lincoln Riley and USC as they approach this transfer portal window? You kind of see you see programs approach the transfer portal from two different ways. You see the programs like Ole Miss, you see the programs like Auburn, who are kind of using all the bullets in the chamber relatively early on in terms of landing their commitments. And look, there's pros and cons to it, right? The pros are a lot of these guys want it's more of a business decision than it is out of the high school recruiting trail where you're enjoying the process of the visits. Getting on these kids early, I think, can work in your favor in a lot of different ways. Now, the cons to that approach is you're kind of emptying the chamber relatively early on in the process. Now, the pros of the way I think Lincoln Riley and USC are approaching this is, hey, we're going to be patient. We're not going to overspend for players that certain programs might be overspending for. We're going to let the dust settle and get quality players. And I'm not going to use the word price, but at a reasonable, I guess I will use the word price, at a reasonable price. You know, the teams that are out there landing commitments early are probably getting into some bidding wars and really being aggressive in terms of resource allocation. I don't know if there's a right and wrong way to do it. What I would caution Lincoln Riley is last year you kind of saw that same mentality, you know, letting guys like Dominic Williams or Derek Carmen walk because you thought maybe the resources weren't worth it. And you kind of, for lack of better terms, got left holding a little bit of an empty bag. Like there weren't difference makers on the defensive line for USC in the 2024 season. That difference maker, you could have had a guy like Derek Harmon is playing on Oregon and they're competing for a national championship. So if you're going to be patient and maybe the word cautious comes to mind, you want to still make sure you're getting guys that are making your roster better heading into 2025. That's going to be the key for Lincoln Riley in USC. Now I think the dust is starting to settle, and I think this might be the time you see USC start making some moves. Want to get into some of those moves that we might be seeing them make. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the USC fans, there's a lot of different thoughts and feelings you can have about how the last 10 days have gone. Would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. Maybe some of y'all might just disagree with me in terms of my take on USC strategy, and I think that is completely fair. So would love to hear y'all from y'all in the comment section. As always, to the USC fans, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me, the support y'all show continues to be amazing. So appreciate you guys. Well, hopefully we get some commitments to start breaking down relatively soon. Let's get into some names that I think are interesting. I think you got to start with big guy Jamal Jarrett coming over from Georgia. He's going to be on campus for USC on Wednesday. This is the body type that USC is looking for. There's no question about that. You just didn't have a guy that looks like Jamal Jarrett. And I'll say this, Jamal Jarrett on the SEC football field, he looks the part. There's no denying that. And it's rare to find these kind of bodies in the transfer portal. Now, the production has not exactly matched what people thought he was coming out of high school. Hasn't really gotten on the field a ton for Georgia. Hasn't necessarily been a super productive football player for Georgia. There's a couple of conversations you have to have. One, this kid's only going into year 3. You know, this is not a 5th, 6th, 7th year senior that has kind of maximized himself physically. So I think the conversation Lincoln Riley's having with Sean Nua and Dan Lynn and Coach Henney is, do we think we can tap into this kid and get him to be the player a lot of people thought he was coming out of high school? There's a very good chance that he becomes that guy. And if you're USC staff and you're looking at him saying, yeah, we think we can do some things with him, it's probably where it starts. Now, Jamal Jarrett as a football player, you can't teach the kind of size you want to see a little bit more physicality to his game. I feel like he doesn't play sometimes like he's 6'5", 350 pounds. Sometimes slow out of his stance, doesn't exactly run the line of scrimmage and get off blocks the way you want. Does Danton Lynn, does Coach Henney, does Lincoln Riley, do they think they can maximize this kid and get him to take that next step going into year 3? That's probably the conversation you're having with Jamal Jarrett. I'd love to see USC get a guy like Jamal Jarrett because, again, you can't teach the presence and size that he brings to USC. And at times, it's just quite for like Nate Clifton, Gavin Mayer, that Devin Tompkins really like some of those players. They just didn't have the size that you were kind of looking for on the inside of the defensive line. The only guy that kind of had it was Kobe Pepe. Next guy I want to talk about, this kid I love, and I would love to see USC turn it up for him. That's Eugene Brooks from Oklahoma. A familiar name, obviously from the state of California, coming out of high school in 2024. Did not play for Oklahoma as a true freshman. This kid, to me, coming out of high school, was just a bona fide lock Power 4 starter to me. Oh, is it a little concerning that he didn't really get much burn as a true freshman? Yeah, maybe. It's rare to see those guys play a lot in the SEC early. Bet on this kid all day. I mean, 6'3", 335 pounds, kind of built like a fire hydrant, but he is strong as an ox. I mean, this is a guy that has a really strong anchor, can shock people with his hands off the line of scrimmage. From what I saw of him, especially that senior year film coming out of high school, this is a guy that can play early. Would not be surprised if he comes to USC and immediately competes for one of those starting guard spots. It's a bona fide Power 4 starter, in my opinion, from what I saw from him coming out of high school. And it does sound like he's interested in coming back to California, right? He's visiting UCLA. I think they're trying to schedule him to get to USC. This would be, again, not only a guy that I think could be a plug and play starter in the 2025 season, but he's a guy you can build with, like another young offensive lineman that you can plug into this program, which is how you want to build your offensive line. It's not sustainable to keep getting one-year rentals on the offensive line. You want guys who are going to be within this program. Eugene Brooks, 4 years of eligibility remaining. Going to the linebacker spot, I think this suddenly becomes a position that you probably want to address, right? Eric Gentry coming back, but John Davis hitting the portal. You obviously lose Easton Mascarenas Arnold and Mason Cobb. Kamari House, St. John Bosco kid, a kid that we like coming out of high school. USC, I believe, did not offer out of high school. True freshman, 317 snaps, 35 tackles, only a 12% missed tackle. We're really good in space. And this is probably where it starts with Kamari House. You probably want to get him a little bit more physically ready to play in the Big Ten, taking on blocks and being physical between the tackles. He's an undersized linebacker. These are the kind of linebackers we've seen Danton Lynn really go after. These speed in space backers that can go sideline to sideline, that can operate in coverage. Kamari House, to me, is that guy. You have some young guys, Desmond Stevens, Elijah Newby, that we feel good about. But outside of that, Eric Gentry is really the only linebacker right now that we're really confident in. Kamari House is a young cat that's got 3 more years of eligibility, but he's also a proven commodity at the Big Ten level. Played a lot of football as a true freshman for Washington, a defense that was much better than I thought it would be in the 2024 year. And so this would be really interesting. And then if you just want to get a guy that's played a lot of football, Jacob Manu makes a ton of sense. California kid, was under recruited out of high school, and it kind of makes sense. He was 5'11", 210 coming out of high school. This was a guy I hadn't even heard of when he was coming out of high school. Comes to Arizona and really balls out. Was a first team All Pac-12 guy in 2023. Now, not as good of a year in 2024, but this is a guy that can play as an all-conference linebacker. And as you're trying to bridge that gap between some of the young linebackers that are either coming up in this program, guys like Newby and Desmond Stevens, or some of the true freshmen, this one would make a lot of sense. You're getting a really good linebacker that knows how to find the football, but you're also getting a guy that can bridge that gap for some of the young linebackers in this room. Last name I will note, and this is probably my biggest, I wouldn't say concern, but talking point for USC, and that is a pass rush. It was 116 total quarterback hurries for USC in 2024, and a lot of those quarterback hurries came from linebackers and safeties blitzing. The front four, from a pass rush standpoint, was simply not good enough for USC. Dan Lynn wants to be able to get pressure with his front four, so you don't have to bring blitzes as much. Amaris Williams, another guy kind of similar to Eugene Brooks, did not have the freshman year that I thought he would have at Auburn. I think this kid is awesome. And he just hit the transfer portal a couple of days ago. Not really sure where he's looking. Big time talent, a big time juice off the edge, really powerful in the hands. As a pure athlete, he's special. and he's only 6'2", doesn't have a ton of length, but he's really, really twitchy off the line of scrimmage, big time power in his hands. This is one of those kids that to me I'm betting on coming off the edge. And you can land a guy like Amaris Williams. You start looking at the young defensive line and say, all right, Cam Fountain really started to turn the corner at the end of 2024. You're bringing Amaris Williams, who has 4 years. I believe he might have not redshirted, but he's a young cat that has multi-years of eligibility. You're bringing Jakeem Stewart. You kind of coach along G. Abasari and Carlin Jones. That's kind of what you want it to look like. So again, USC right now, it's kind of a waiting game, it seems like, for USC. They're not making a ton of offers. They're not having a ton of kids on campus, but there are still a lot of really good players out there. And as these other programs that you're competing with kind of empty their chambers, USC should be sitting on a decent amount of bullets, so to speak, to get aggressive in the transfer portal. We'll see how USC decides to do it. But again, I'm okay with being patient, but your patience has to result in something at the end of this transfer portal window. That's the key. We'll see how it plays out. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Hopefully that USC commitment sweatshirt right there is getting put on relatively soon. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.